Clip on Fox Weather. Title: 2024 Atlantic hurricane season begins and expected to be a busy one. The Atlantic hurricane season kicks off on June 1st and runs through November 30th. And NOAA warns that extremely warm sea temperatures could make this a wild one. Put up by Hillary Andrews, Andrews. Let's listen to this clip, plays for 4 minutes and 23 seconds.
Last year was a season where we said, well, we've got the El Nino to help us out. At least that should keep a lid on things to an extent. But it just got completely overpowered by the warm sea surface temperatures. That, looking back at last year, gives us a little pause, a little concern moving into this season.
Exactly. Still an above average season, above active season. And you're right, El Nino, I think in some way kind of helped with the path of those storms last season. The upper level hostile winds did have an impact on maybe the curvature of some of those storms. But overall,
when 20 of them last year.
Exactly. The water really overtook the amount of storm activity that we saw. And then as the fact that we're moving into a La Nina, we just know that that activity is going to increase.
Yeah, you just saw the comparison there. How many more storms? What the climatology tells us, looking back at tropical seasons past, La Ninas promote more active seasons, and we've got 3 portions of the Atlantic Basin that are at all-time record warmth right now.
Exactly.
So that's why I've been saying it's interesting to consider that NOAA's forecast was both their most aggressive and least surprising that they've ever issued. Right there, 17 to 25 named storms.
And I think up to 7 as a major category 3 or greater storm is really notable. This is the Atlantic storm name list. Alberta would kick us off for the season. I think oftentimes we look for the I-named storm because historically it is the most retired storm name on the list.
What's interesting here too, Jane, is that there's 21 names on the list. Not every letter from the alphabet has a name that corresponds with it, so it's 21. But the consensus among all the agencies that put out a hurricane forecast is 24 storms.
Right.
So we might see the debut of that new supplemental list this year.
Exactly. I mean, we say goodbye to the Greek alphabet and we bring that supplemental list in play. The average peak of the season comes later into the summer, August, September, I think bleeding into October, the way the activity has gone these days. This is also the transition to La Nina around this time. So that's what I think is what's leading to this increase in our numbers.
That's right into the core of the season. But what I'm interested to see this year, Jane, is we've been talking a lot over the last several weeks. When you have a basin that looks more like the peak season, does it act like the peak season?
Very true.
Because of the warmth that we have. And again, as you pointed out, over the next couple of months, that transition into La Nina.
And I think what will be interesting, too, does it act that way? I mean, we haven't seen sea surface temperatures to this degree, for such a period of time ahead of the season, really ever on record. So there is a couple of question marks there. We look at June, look for those homegrown storms, but typically the end of the month is when we see that first named storm.
Jane, though, typically at this point in the season, you're looking for warm water, which maybe in a regular year, if you want to call it that, only the Gulf has. But we have warm water in a number of different basins like we did early part of last season, even with the El Nino. You remember we had those weird storms that developed in the main development region. So maybe you have to throw out some of those climatology graphics because of what the Atlantic looks like right now.
I think that's a great point. I mean, of course, you look for those homegrown systems with the dying fronts and how active this season has been for severe weather. You're thinking that might be a bit of into play, but you're right. I think all bets are kind of off going into this season. This is an interesting graphic, how often hurricanes strike. I mean, oftentimes people have recency bias, but all coastlines are subject to seeing some type of landfall from a tropical system.
Yes, some more so than others. I mean, you've got South Florida, which back in the 50s and 60s, they had that very active period. So those numbers are skewed, but it's the nature of probability. Unfortunately, you can get into a bad year and deal with multiple systems and go long stretches where you don't have anything. So,
yeah, for example, the Northeast. But I will say one thing that stands out to me last year was that a lot of that storm track had that curve up the eastern seaboard. Not a lot of impact, but definitely a storyline for places like Maine, the coast of Maine.
Down East Maine, busy.
Exactly. So we'll see how this year shapes up.
Well, you heard what they said. And it's going to be a nasty one. Ready or not, the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season is here. NOAA put out a forecast with the highest number of storms ever for its May predictions. Atlantic hurricane season officially starts June the 1st and runs through November 30th. The National Hurricane Center picked the 6-month period because it accounts for about 97% of all Atlantic storms and hurricanes, according to NOAA's Hurricane Research Division. April actually welcomed the first tropical disturbance. While an early disturbance does not signal an extremely active hurricane season, expert forecasters do. NOAA's forecast shows a well above average season with 17 to 25 named storms, 8 to 13 hurricanes, and 4 to 7 major hurricanes. Other forecasters have been in agreement. You know what's going to happen is people are not going to be able to afford their home insurance. That's already bouncing off the charts with all of the storms that have taken place and the destruction caused by tornadoes and hail throughout Texas, Oklahoma, and other states. The reason for an aggressive forecast are 1, extremely warm tropical Atlantic Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico, and 2, the expectation that La Nina will develop in the Pacific by the heart of the hurricane season, wrote Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross. A La Nina most often produces an upper-level wind regime over the Atlantic that is relatively conducive to storm development. Norcross said the Atlantic water temperature and the state of El Niño's La Nina explain 78% of the tropical activity during the season. Well, like I said, folks, it's going to be nasty. Well, interesting here is that there are 21 names on the list. Not every letter from the alphabet has a name that corresponds with it. So it's 21, said Fox Weather meteorologist Ian Oliver. But the consensus among all the agencies that put out a hurricane forecast is 24 storms. So we might see the debut of that new supplemental list this year. Until 2021, forecasters used Greek letters to name excess storms. That only happened twice in 2021. The World Meteorological Organization, which maintains the list of names used during hurricane season, developed a list to overflow names. Alberta will be the first tropical storm of hurricane name during the 2024 season. If we get through William, the supplemental list of names will be used, and it starts with Adria. You can take a look at the names they've already selected. It's going to be nasty, folks. And like I said, cost for insurance housing will be off the charts. It's already off the charts for cars. Pass it along, folks. I cannot do this alone. And thanks for listening.